Welcome back to another challenging chapter of the worst fighting game, the never-ending tournament's crown, the worst fighting game. Last time, the befuddling and fugly Ultra Vortec stepped into our arena and came up pretty short against our reigning champion, the D&D game. I forget what it's called.
Combination!
Oh yeah. This week, though, we're headed back to the hedonistic and unhinged world of the 90s PC scene, which saw an oozing pile of fighting games being released to a smattering of booze, but mostly a lot of silent, uncomfortable apathy. So allow me to introduce Savage Warriors, an oft-forgotten flop that fancied itself as the next Mortal Kombat, which it very definitely wasn't much at all. But the question is, will it be the worst fighting game? Well, we won't know for sure until we get it in the ring. So yeah, Savage Warriors is 90s as all hell, and in fact was released smack dab in the middle of them right in 1995. What's that? You'd like a cheap pop culture rewind?
Hey, wait, no, Matt, you can't do that.
Let's do it! Mortal Kombat the movie torpedoed into theaters that summer, Donkey Kong Country 2 banana slammed onto the SNES, and Bart sold his soul and went straight to hell on the latest Simpsons episode. It was a halcyon year for many, but I think I can safely say that the release of Savage Warriors played little to no part in that. As for who unleashed said Savage Warriors, well, that would be our good friends at Mindscape Publishing and its developer Atriad Software, a company I expect many of you may not know now, but will know when I inform you they changed their name to Callisto Entertainment just a year later, and then developed the most realistic and authentic downtown London simulator ever made, Nightmare Creatures. Atriad, or let's just call them Callisto, it's a cooler name, were experimenting with a variety of graphical styles in several of their games. Dark Earth was using static rendered backgrounds a la Resident Evil. Nightmare Creatures, or Gothic as it was originally going to be called, went full 3D, and Savage Warriors went on a decidedly different path. It used a combination of hand-drawn 2D backgrounds and voxels for the characters. At least I think they're voxels, as nothing else really comes close to describing this particular look. Once that was set in stone, they proceeded to stuff the game with as many 90s fighting game tropes, i.e. Mortal Kombat, as they could. An emphasis on violence, but not too much violence, a gnarly cast of characters, a big bad warlord-like boss, and bullshit buzzwords, which we're about to get into. Now, if you're like me, and I know I am, Savage Warriors is probably best remembered for not the game itself, but rather this magazine advertisement, which I recall seeing in just about every issue of EGM or GamePro at the time. Now, disclaimer, there's not much else to the development history of this one, so I'm going to be going in pretty hard on this advert as it's filled with both lies and mistruths. Alright, so here we have a middle school science class quality skeleton and all the injuries it sustained from tangling with these Savage Warriors. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but if we zoom in on this little section right here, we are presented with something that somehow manages to put even blast processing to shame. 3D biomotion is something the game constantly shoves in your face, and I honestly can't tell you with 100% certainty what it's supposed to mean, but if I was to hazard a guess, I think it's attempting to describe the graphics. These voxel-based characters, cause yeah, one look at these guys and the first thing that pops into your head is biomotion. The rest of the info box revolves around Savage Warriors being compared rather favorably to MK2. Here it says weapons, standard, which I take to mean every character comes equipped with weapons while MK2 does not, which of course is a lie. Only a couple of the Savage Warriors enter battle holding a melee weapon, like a bat or a knife, but most of the roster does not, and if said weapons do get knocked out of their hands, they can't be picked up again. That doesn't seem much better than MK2, which, while they're all used in special moves, still features several weapons like Kung Lao's hat, Katana's fans, Melina's sais, and Baraka's blades. This is the very first comparison this ad attempts to make, and it's already built on faulty logic. Movable perspective. This is another one that's not 100% on the level. By pressing one of the F keys, you can switch the camera to a more 3/4 perspective, but all this really is the exact same stage redrawn at a different angle, which isn't the big 3D power move the game thinks it is. I do recall looking at this specific screenshot here back in the day and thinking the game was indeed fully 3D, only to obviously feel a little shortchanged when I did finally play it. You can also switch to a VGA mode, which displays everything in a nice little window and gives you a full view of the stage, which I guess is cute. Interactions with background. We'll talk about this in greater detail a little later on, but it's probably the most accurate part of this house of lies. Yeah, there are several stages in the game that do have interactable elements. That is true. So let's just move on. Replay mode. They should not have listed this as a positive. While MK2 has no such feature, the way Savage Warriors implements theirs is clunky, slow, and kinda pointless. Finally, we have 3D biomotion. Yeah, MK2, a game that was by this time more than 2 years old, does not have biomotion. Yeah, you roasted them, Savage Warriors. Look, you just can't pull something out of your ass and then say other stuff sucks because it doesn't have that same ass stuff you pulled out. I can't just make a game myself and say it has, 4D Echo vibes, and since Tekken 8 doesn't have that, it must be shit. Now look, I can go on and on about this magazine thing. The screenshot descriptions imply there are fatalities when there aren't. It says there are 11 playable characters in full 3D. They're not. And worst of all, Savage Warriors has the Kavorka, the sheer balls to claim to be the first fighter designed exclusively for the PC. Oh, what is this one must fall and body blows erasure? Whew. If I was to judge this game based solely on this ad, it would be the new worst fighting game, but yeah, I digress, because we need to move on to the... Off the bat, I have to say, the voxel-based fighters are a neat idea, and that's about it. They lack way more detail than, say, traditional pixel graphics, rendered sprites, or 3D polygons, but, they're quirky. The 2D backgrounds fare better overall, I think, as they're actually drawn quite nicely, a mix of forests, beaches, caves, and other naturalistic environments. Menus are fine, they fit in with the aesthetic they're going for, but I have to take special care to shit on these life bars and the HUD in general, as it might be the worst I've ever seen. I'll commend anyone for doing something slightly different from the norm, but not when it's worse, and on something that was never broken to begin with. A life bar is simple and to the point. Just a quick glance is enough to tell you how close your opponent is to dying, but having to instead squint your eyes to discern tiny numbers, well, you're just missing me with that shit. On the flip side of this already shaky presentation though, we do have the difficulty slider, which is pretty charming and familiar somehow.
That's as much heat as I can get from this.
Moreover is the character select screen, which I also gotta give big ups to. You play as the final boss's hand here, and you're choosing who has to start the Savage Warriors tournament, I guess. Actually, I should touch upon the story a bit, because, context matters. A bunch of warriors throughout different time periods have been selected by the Big Bad, who is simply known as the Master, and are then dragged from their respective ages by a crazy green light and plopped onto the Master's island, with the final goal being to defeat him, if they can. It's a story I've heard countless times before in other C-tier and lesser fighting games, so it's not really impressing me much. But regardless, this screen is still pretty rad. Once you select a warrior, you can then read a little bio about them, but you can still have a chance to back out and select someone else if you want to. Now, I don't think I need to go through this roster in detail because they're all pretty generic. Martial arts girl, New York gang member, military guy, Egyptian princess, reptile monster, Native American, African tribesman. Let's just move on. To the secret characters. Via cheat codes, you can pick the final boss, a Playboy bunny, a legally distinct Scotty Pippin for some reason, a lawn gnome, and a savage warrior man? I can't take away the goofy, crazy nature of these guys, but I can take away any reason to actually play as them. None of them have any special moves or any distinct movesets. I guess Callisto never quite got around to that. Moving on, the game does take advantage of the CD format with some solid tunes. It is a lot of guitars and repetitive high tempos, but it's inoffensive and in line with what you'd expect from a CD PC game from the 90s. There's also a lengthy, fully animated intro that has a very distinct look and feel to it, as it reminds me of other European-made games like Flashback. Finally, endings. Yes, there are endings if you manage to beat the master, but he's insanely hard. If you are able to persevere though, then good for you, because it's absolutely 200% not worth your time. Everyone gets the same generic animated clip where a green blast comes out of the master's chest, your fighter does their O-face, and that's it. No additional text, no additional nothing. As you then might expect, this no-frills approach to content is liberally used throughout the rest of the game, especially in the gameplay-wise. Savage Warriors is about as basic as you can get. There's no real combos, no counters/defensive mechanics, no dashing, no supers, and every character is limited to just 3 special moves apiece. They usually come in the form of 2 different projectiles and some type of rushdown move, but they're all made moot by the bane of my existence, a stamina meter. Anyone who has ever thought that a mechanic which limits the usage of your regular special moves in a fighting game was a good idea, let it be known that I hate you. It makes sense to limit like really powerful techniques like supers or whatever, but not the basic building blocks that make up the moment-to-moment gameplay of any button basher. So, like, once you've done 2 special moves, you then have to wait for the bar to replenish, which takes a hot minute, and there's no way to pump it up any faster. Now, I would be okay with this if the gameplay offered depth and excitement elsewhere, but it doesn't. It really doesn't, unless you count the stage interactables, which you shouldn't. These are just hooks or branches which are located at the top of some stages. Press up and punch and you can hang off them and do one attack. This stumpy little kick right here. You're so high up there that no one can really reach you if they stay grounded, and you can't hit them either, so it's just really awkward.
What's wrong with your hand?
This is my full extension.
And that's the full extent of the interactables, you know, the big feature they mentioned twice in the advert. As stated earlier, even though Savage Warriors really wants to make you think it has fatalities, it doesn't. There's no finish 'em state, no pit fatals, zilch. I have to say, this strikes me as really odd, like, why not? The game does have some blood during bouts, not a ton of it, but it's there, and the marketing has this destroyed corpse with a ton of injuries as its centerpiece. Like, maybe they couldn't do that sort of stuff with voxels, but whatever the case, it's still lame as hell. As I also mentioned earlier, replays are a thing the game does, and that is to show you the entire match from start to finish. It is cute that the boss is overlooking the replay on a command console like he's studying the fighters, and he looks super proud of it too, like, "Hey mom, look what I'm doing!" The problem is that you always get brought to the screen after each and every bout, which quickly makes it a tedious and prolonged affair. Virtua Fighter, which did replays back in 1993, still did it the best, by just highlighting the last 3 seconds of the match. Also, as you can very clearly see, with your eyes, these replays can't display any of the background elements, so you have both fighters swatting at each other in this Mode 7 style nightmare. It is neat that the camera can actually rove around the action now, showing different angles on the fly, and it makes me think, why didn't they just do the entire game like this, with simplified backgrounds a la Virtua Fighter 32X? I think, at least visually, it would have been more impressive. With that said, I remain steadfast that replays were not something the game should have been boasting about when they're this useless and boring. As for modes, well, take a look at this screen right here, cause that's all you get. No practice, survival, or a time attack, but then again, when you have a game that feels this bad to play, you don't really need them. Oh, speaking of how the game feels, if I could use just one word to describe how Savage Warriors handles its speed and the way moves connect and animate, well, that would be balls. Yeah, it really reminds me of that 16-bit classic I've covered in the past. Everything feels really sludgy and slow for the most part, but then certain moves are quite fast and kind of feel like they stretch out when you do them, if that makes any sense. Regardless, it is not a good thing at all. The impact of the hits feel really weak because of it, and the computer AI blocks a lot, and there's not much you can do about that, especially since throws can be blocked too. Yes, throws can be blocked too.
The hell was that?
Jumps are also incredibly slow and are way too vertical, which is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I assume all of these issues have something to do with the voxels and how the characters are constructed. If I was to compare, I'd actually say this feels worse to play than Balls, and even if that wasn't the case, has way less mechanics anyway, which is truly a flabbergasting thing and should clue you in on where this one is going to place. Now, don't get me wrong, Savage Warriors is bad, but it has some charm, like, it's trying. From the animated intro to the master being this cute little warlord who thinks he's all diabolical and shit, a good selection of cheat codes, and finally taking a big risk with the voxels. But everything else is just no fatalities, no interesting mechanics, bland characters, no endings, no modes, terribly shitty stamina system, and makes Balls feel like Third Strike. However, all of that is still a good deal better than everything I experienced in Iron and Blood, which, as I broke down, is a literal fun vampire. He's the fun vampire! So, yeah, they gave it a good go, but these Savage Warriors are not dethroning our reigning champion, but will land with a soft kerplop in the close but not quite tier, which I think is rather appropriate. Hell, you can even put that on the advertisement if you had a time machine. Savage Warriors, certainly not the worst fighting game ever made. But if any of you out there know of any other button bashers you feel might have a chance against the wretchedness of Iron and Blood, do let me know in the comments below or head on over to the sacred fighting temple that is my social media. And until then, Warriors, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.